To understand the weight of Harriet Jacobs's writing, you have to understand the world she was writing for. When she published Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl in 1861, she wasn't just telling a story of survival, she was making a specific, pointed argument about what it meant to be a woman under the system of slavery. She wrote under the pseudonym Linda Brent, and she chose a style that felt familiar to her white, northern female readers, the sentimental novel. But she used that familiarity to deliver a much harder truth, that for an enslaved woman, the very concept of virtue and motherhood was a battlefield. The story begins with a deceptive sense of security. As a child, the narrator experiences a period of relative stability under the care of her grandmother. Her grandmother is a resourceful, industrious woman who tries to build a small business to eventually buy the family's freedom. It's a vision of a life where hard work and morality might actually lead to liberty. But that stability is shattered when the narrator's mother and her mistress pass away. Suddenly, the narrator and her brother, William, are left under the control of Dr. Flint. Dr. Flint is the central antagonist of the book, but he isn't just a typical overseer. He is a psychological predator. He doesn't just want to own her labor, he wants to own her spirit and her body. He engages in a systematic campaign of sexual harassment, using his legal authority as a master to corner her. For the narrator, the terror isn't just physical, it's the constant, suffocating pressure of a man who knows that the law is entirely on his side. As she grows older, the narrator faces an impossible choice. She realizes that as long as she remains under Flint's direct control, she has no agency over her own body or her future. In a move that was controversial even for the abolitionist audiences of the time, she makes a calculated decision to enter into a relationship with a white man, Mr. Sands. She doesn't frame this as a romance, but as a survival strategy. She calls it cunning. In the logic of the time, a woman's reputation was everything, but for an enslaved woman, her reputation was something her master could destroy at any moment. By choosing Sands, she is attempting to use the only tool she has left to secure a way out of Flint's reach. This choice creates a deep rift with her grandmother, who views the situation through a traditional lens of morality. The grandmother wants her granddaughter to remain virtuous to protect her soul, but the narrator is focused on protecting her life and her future children. This brings us to the most agonizing part of her journey, motherhood. As she has children, the stakes of her situation escalate from personal survival to the survival of her lineage. Under the laws of the time, the status of a child followed the mother. This meant her children were legally her property, which meant they were also Dr. Flint's property. She realizes that if she is sold, or if she is punished, her children will be torn from her. The very instinct to protect them becomes a legal liability that makes her even more vulnerable to being sold or separated. The breaking point comes when she faces the threat of being sent to a harsh plantation to break her spirit. To avoid this, she executes a daring escape during a heavy rainstorm. But freedom, for her, doesn't mean moving to the north immediately. It means a different kind of imprisonment. She spends 7 years hiding in a cramped, dark garret, a tiny, suffocating attic space she calls her loophole of retreat. This is perhaps the most harrowing part of the book. She's physically trapped in near-total darkness and isolation, just a few feet above where her children are playing, but she can never speak to them or touch them. She endures the physical toll of the heat, the lack of light, and the psychological torture of being a ghost in her own life. She stays there because it is the only way to remain near her children and avoid Dr. Flint's pursuit. It is a radical, desperate form of agency. She is choosing a small, dark prison to avoid a larger, more permanent one. During these years of hiding, she observes the profound hypocrisy of the society around her. She watches how Southern Christianity is used as a tool of oppression, where religious leaders use scripture to preach obedience to masters and justify the cruelty of the system. To her, the religion of her masters is a hollow shell used to maintain the status quo, while her own faith becomes a quiet, resilient source of strength. Eventually, after those 7 years of hiding, she manages to escape to the north. But the book doesn't end with a simple celebration of liberty. Jacobs is careful to show that freedom in the North is not a total liberation. She encounters pervasive racial segregation and the constant, looming threat of the fugitive slave law. Even in a free state, a black woman could be snatched up and sent back into bondage. The North is not the promised land of total safety, it is simply a different kind of struggle. She eventually reunites with her children, but their status remains legally precarious. The final act of her journey is a complex navigation of legal claims and the deceptive letters sent by her former masters. In the end, her freedom is not granted by a change of heart from her oppressors, but through a commercial transaction. A woman named Mrs. Bruce, who acts as a benefactor, purchases the narrator's freedom for $300. It is a bittersweet ending. While the narrator and her children are finally free citizens in the North, the very fact that her life had to be bought like a piece of property is a final, stinging indignity. She has achieved the goal, but the cost has been a lifetime of psychological scars and the loss of years to a dark, cramped attic. When we look back at this narrative, several themes stand out that make it so much more than just a memoir. First, there is the reconfiguration of womanhood. In the mid-19th century, there was a concept called the cult of true womanhood, which argued that a real woman was pious, pure, domestic, and submissive. White society used these traits to define respectable women. Jacobs argues that these traits were a luxury the enslaved could not afford. For an enslaved woman, purity was something her master could strip away at will. By reclaiming the roles of woman and mother through her own terms, she challenges the idea that black women were inherently different or less deserving of these identities. Then there is the concept of cunning. In many narratives of this era, characters who used deception were often portrayed as morally flawed. But Jacobs flips this. She presents cunning as a necessary survival mechanism. When the law and the social order are rigged entirely against you, deception isn't a sin, it's a tool of resistance. It is the only way to exercise agency when you have no legal standing. The book also offers a devastating critique of how slavery weaponized motherhood. We often think of motherhood as a source of strength, but for the enslaved, it was a source of extreme vulnerability. The law turned a mother's love into a way for the state to control her and for the master to threaten her. This creates a paradox, where the more a woman fought to protect her children, the more she put herself in the crosshairs of her oppressors. Finally, Jacobs's depiction of the North is a vital part of her message. She refuses to let her readers believe that the North was a perfect, moral alternative to the South. By highlighting the fugitive slave law and the social segregation in the North, she shows that racism was not just a Southern problem, but a national one. She forces her audience to see that legal freedom is not the same thing as true equality or safety. In the end, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl is a story about the limits of human endurance and the lengths a person will go to reclaim their own soul. It is a book about the struggle to remain a person in a system designed to treat you like a thing. It's a heavy, difficult read, but it's one that insists on seeing the humanity of those whom history tried to erase.